Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 52 of Diehlman at Halftime, the NBA podcast that tops all others. I'm your host, Larry Diehlman. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome aboard, and if you've been a loyal listener, welcome back. We have much to get to today and not a lot of time to do it. We have a few sections that we'll get into, but they may not be the normal ones you're used to hearing. Let's get to our content for the week. Former All-Star and former Brooklyn Net Ben Simmons is signing with the LA Clippers following a buyout from Brooklyn. Simmons didn't play more than 42 games in the 3 years with Brooklyn. He's dealt with back issues and he hasn't looked anywhere close to his Philadelphia form. Simmons is set to be a free agent this summer, but I'm not sure who would want to sign him long-term at this point. Legendary NBA head coach and broadcaster Hubie Brown announced his final game on Sunday, February 9th between the Philadelphia 76ers and Milwaukee Bucks. His first NBA assistant coach job was in Milwaukee when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Oscar Robertson played in 1972. Brown was the head coach of the Hawks, Knicks, and Grizzlies. He has been with ESPN since 2004, and Brown is in 3 Hall of Fames: the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame as a contributor, class of 2005, the College Basketball Hall of Fame, class of 2006, and the National Sports Media Association Hall of Fame as a broadcaster, class of 2022. He won Coach of the Year in 1978 and 2004. In 1994 and 1999, Brown was nominated for a Sports Emmy, and he was awarded the Chuck Daly Lifetime Achievement Award in 2017. As we get closer to the All-Star break, we can start bracing for the second half of the NBA season. But first, this week's Diehlman at Halftime is a special edition. Instead of our usual highlight, lowlight, random stat, and game of the week, we'll dive into the top 5 trades of this past Thursday's deadline. Before my analysis, however, I threw in an honorable mention. The trades are in reverse order from pretty good to super important. This episode is entitled Pending Transactions. So, who's raising eyebrows at the moment? Let's get to our top 5 trades from the 2025 NBA trade deadline, and we'll start with an honorable mention. We'll get to the Luka Dončić trade in a minute. However, the Lakers went out and got a center to join Dončić and LeBron James for all of 5 seconds. Rookie Dalton Knecht, Cam Reddish, an unprotected first-round pick, and a pick swap were off to Charlotte for Mark Williams. Then a report on Saturday night came out that the trade was rescinded because Williams failed a physical. Williams is having his best season as a pro, averaging just under 16 points on 59% shooting in 25 minutes. Without this deal, LA's options at center are bleak. Fan favorite Knecht returns to LA while Williams stays in Charlotte. Imagine the awkwardness in the locker room. Let's get to our top 5 trades of the NBA deadline, and remember these are in reverse order, so we'll start with number 5 and work our way to number 1. Number 5, Mr. Middleton goes to Washington. It's the end of an era in Milwaukee as the Bucks traded 3-time All-Star Khris Middleton to the Wizards for Kyle Kuzma. Milwaukee received Kuzma, Jericho Sims from the Knicks, and draft compensation. Washington got Middleton, my condolences, A.J. Johnson, the draft rights to Mateus Lasor, a first-round pick swap, and cash. New York received DeLon Wright, Hugo Benson's draft rights, and cash, and the Spurs got Patrick Baldwin Jr. and cash. Middleton has a player option for next season, so he might stay in Washington. Milwaukee, meanwhile, gets younger with the addition of Kuzma. Kuzma is by no stretch a top option on a contender. He was basically putting up empty stats on the Wizards, so being next to Giannis Antetokounmpo might do him good. Although I'm not sure how this trade makes the Bucks better, like against Boston in a hypothetical playoff series. Let's go to number 4, heading up north. While the New Orleans Pelicans continue their free fall, Brandon Ingram goes from the warm south to the freezing north. Ingram is going to the Toronto Raptors for Kelly Olynyk, Bruce Brown, a first-round pick, and a second-round pick. Reports are saying that despite Ingram's expiring contract, he will be re-signing over the summer. This deal pairs Ingram with forwards Scotty Barnes and R.J. Barrett. This season doesn't matter for Toronto due to all of their injuries, but next year could be interesting. New Orleans didn't want to give Ingram a max contract. He's not a top 10 player or anything, but he might be able to thrive with Barnes and Barrett. The Pelicans, though, yeesh. They better pray one of their upcoming draft picks hit. Let's go to our number 3 trade. You better not pout unless you're Jimmy Butler. The Miami Heat made the right move by ridding themselves of Jimmy Butler at the deadline. Butler was sent to Golden State with 2 second-round picks and cash in a 5-team trade. The Heat received Andrew Wiggins, Kyle Anderson, Davion Mitchell from Toronto, and a protected Golden State first-round pick. Utah, Toronto, and Detroit were involved with role players, second-round picks, and cash going everywhere. Butler declined his player option next year and re-signed on a 2-year, $121 million deal. Wiggins to Miami is a good move. He's a younger forward who can experience Heat culture as a championship-winning veteran. The Warriors, though, wanted to pair Steph Curry with a star. They got one. A trio of Curry, Butler, and Draymond Green should be interesting. They're all at least 34 years old, and they're all signed until the 2026-27 season. After that, who knows? Alright, let's go to number 2. Victor Wembanyama has a co-star. San Antonio understood the assignment. Victor Wembanyama can't do everything by himself. The Sacramento Kings sent star guard De'Aaron Fox and Jordan McLaughlin to San Antonio. Sacramento received Zach LaVine, Sidi Cissoko, 3 first-round picks and 3 second-round picks. Chicago got Zach Collins, Trey Jones, Kevin Huerter, and their own 2025 pick from the Spurs. After being involved in another trade, the Wizards waived Cissoko. I like this trade for the Spurs because Wembanyama finally has a star on his side. While San Antonio has guys like Devin Vassell and Keldon Johnson, Fox is a former All-Star and All-NBA third-team player. Fox just turned 27 a few months ago, so the timeline with Wembanyama fits nicely. With LaVine out of Chicago, the Bulls can begin, or keep trying to begin, a painful but needed rebuild. Sacramento somehow got more first-round picks than the Mavericks did for Luka Dončić. With DeMar DeRozan and LaVine going from Chicago to Sacramento, the Kings are currently the Sacramento Bulls. Finally, let's go to our number 1 trade of the 2025 deadline, rewriting history. Lakers general manager Rob Pelinka might have pulled off the heist of the century. Dallas sent Luka Dončić, Maxi Kleber, and Markieff Morris to LA. The Lakers sent them Anthony Davis, Max Christie, and a 2029 first-round pick. The Utah Jazz received Jalen Hood-Schifino from LA and 2 second-round picks. Time will tell if Dallas general manager Nico Harrison outsmarted the league or himself, but Mavericks fans want him launched into the sun. 1 first-round pick for Luka Dončić? A report came out that Pelinka asked Harrison if he was joking when the latter offered Dončić. The Mavericks were reportedly concerned with Dončić's conditioning because he was hovering around 270 pounds and they no longer viewed him as a franchise cornerstone. The idea of giving Dončić a supermax contract of $345 million wasn't in the Mavericks' interest either. Thanks to the trade, he's no longer eligible for that, and it'll cost him over $100 million in his next deal. Who cares about the conditioning when he took your team to the finals last year? While Anthony Davis is still a great player, Dallas's core is now at least 31 or older. And Davis got injured in his first game in a Dallas uniform. He's out multiple weeks with an adductor strain. Meanwhile, the Lakers can easily transition to Dončić for the next decade when LeBron retires. Dallas won the trade in the short term, but the Lakers are long-term winners. If the Mavericks don't win a title in the next 2 years or so, it might go down as an all-time bad trade. And it's interesting to hear how Harrison and Mavericks owner Patrick Dumont have been defending this trade. When you make a move this big, you kind of have to defend it, but just the way they've been describing it has been very bizarre. Harrison was saying about how defense wins championships, they're excited to bring AD in, and, this nobody knew about it, and, we're just going forward, amen. Dumont, however, here's what he had to say, quote, "In my mind, the way teams win is by focus, by having the right character, by having the right culture, and having the right dedication to work as hard as possible to create a championship-winning outcome. And if you're not doing that, you're going to lose. If you look at the greats in the league, the people you and I grew up with, Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, they worked really hard every day with a singular focus to win. And if you don't have that, it doesn't work. And if you don't have that, you shouldn't be part of the Dallas Mavericks." End quote. It's been really interesting how this trade went with literally nobody else knowing about it in the league. It was only the Lakers and the Mavericks. And just the backlash that this trade has received from the fan base. The fans have been protesting outside of American Airlines Center, which is the Mavericks' home arena. They've been chanting with picket signs, and Nico Harrison has been receiving death threats. He even hired a full-time security staff because of it, and I am in no way supporting that. Obviously, sports is never that serious where you have to hire a security staff and you're receiving death threats. Obviously, we don't support that, but this trade has gone down as just a horrible trade in the minds of Mavericks fans and NBA fans too. Literally, fans are clowning Dallas to the point where people are saying that the Cowboys are no longer the worst run franchise in Dallas. We all know what Jerry Jones has done to the Cowboys in recent years, but when Nico Harrison might be one-upping you, that's not good. So we'll see how this plays out in the next few years. Anthony Davis already got injured. If they can't win a title in the next 2 years, this might go down as one of the biggest heists and one of the worst trades in NBA history. To get more insight into our trade deadline special this week, we have our 6th guest on Diehlman at Halftime Season 2. Let's get into it. So for our 6th guest of Season 2 on the Diehlman at Halftime podcast, we welcome Josh Henning. Josh is a producer, on-air host, and digital media contributor at Town Square Media and 97.3 ESPN FM South Jersey, based in Northfield. Formerly, he was the sports director and football and basketball play-by-play announcer at Wibbage 94.3 FM. Josh graduated from Atlantic Cape Community College in 2009 with a history degree and graduated with a bachelor's degree from Rutgers University Camden in 2011. Josh, how are we doing today?
I'm doing well. It's an interesting time of year because it's like the NBA keeps sneaking this trade deadline right in the middle of Super Bowl week. So it's kind of like it's like an awkward juggling act.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting time because here in the Philadelphia suburban area, we're all looking forward to the Super Bowl in New Orleans this week. And Adam Silver said, "No, no, no, we're taking over with the trade deadline." So a lot going on here. So Josh, I wanted to get your thoughts on the NBA trade deadline as we had some bombshells this week. The trade line being on Thursday, February 6th. So now it is past and we can get moving with the second half of the season. So the first question is pretty obvious, I guess. The Luka Dončić trade came out of nowhere. There were no rumors. The players didn't request out. So, what was or is your initial reaction to this trade? And did Mavericks GM Nico Harrison outsmart everyone with this move, or did he outsmart himself?
So a couple things I want to point out here. One is I want to give credit to a friend of mine, NBA insider Brandon Scoopy Robinson, because he had a report last August. And in the report, he had talked to an NBA executive who wanted to remain anonymous, who basically said, he wouldn't be surprised if the Lakers wanted to trade for Luka and that they could make that trade happen before he got his next contract extension. And at the time, it seemed like kind of like a innocuous, like, well, of course the Lakers want Luka. Like, who wouldn't want Luka, right? And then this deal happens. And I think the way you described it initially was about Nico Harrison, about how you're right. He did not let the cat out of the bag to anyone. And that goes to show you that historically, people don't always know this, but a lot of the reports and leaks and stuff that you hear, they either come from an agent or a front office. For the fact that nothing came out of the Lakers, nothing came out of the Mavs in the last several weeks, just goes to show they did a great job at keeping this under wraps. That's my first big takeaway. My second big takeaway is, man, how much did the Mavs, how unhappy were they with Luka? All of a sudden, all these rumors are coming out now that apparently like he doesn't want to get in shape. The guy apparently is like, he's shotgunning beers instead of going to practice. Like all these weird stories started coming out after the trade happened, not before. So the whole thing just feels like, wow, like how much did the Mavs really dislike Luka to trade him like this, especially for a guy who's what, 6 years younger than him?
Yeah, it's definitely a very weird story. And like you said, all these rumors came out after the fact. And there was a video, and you probably have seen it as the audience has as well. There was a video when the Mavs were on their finals run last year where Luka was in the hallway, I guess, near the locker room. He had a beer. And I think it was Michael Finley. He's in the Mavs front office. He was a former player. He
Right.
takes the beer out of Luka's hand. That video now it makes so much more sense than at the time because at the time you're like, dude, don't be that guy. Let him enjoy his beer. But
Yep.
now at this point you're like, whoa, okay. And with Luka apparently hitting near 270, I don't know. It's like he's still dropping like 30-point triple doubles in his sleep. Look at a guy like Nikola Jokic. He's not sporting a six pack or anything, and he's the best player in the NBA. So this trade came out of nowhere. And are you surprised? Like, really, one first round pick? Rudy Gobert got traded for like four of them. Luka is a top five player, and he got one.
So my working assumption has been that I think the reason why they got the return they did was because I think the Lakers basically told the Mavs, look, we're going to give this guy a contract extension. So instead of you guys having to pay him, we're having to pay him. So we're going to give up less for him with the understanding that we're going to give this guy the contract extension that the Mavs didn't want to give him. So I'm assuming that's what the theory was. I think everybody can agree that the Rudy Gobert deal was an overpay because that was more of a desperation move by two organizations that were trying to, for lack of a better term, reshuffle their entire roster.
Right. I think that Gobert trade was an overpay. That was a few years ago now, but this Luka thing, it just came out of nowhere. I actually went to bed before the trade was announced on Saturday night. I woke up Sunday morning And I'm seeing these Bleacher Report notifications like Luka and AD and LeBron didn't know the trade, and then Luka in Lakers gear. I'm like, huh? And then I see the one with the red siren emojis, Luka to the Lakers, and I was like, oh my gosh, definitely crazy. And I think it'll be a seismic shift in the NBA for years to come. So my next point, Victor Wembanyama finally got a partner in crime this week with De'Aaron Fox coming over from Sacramento. Does Fox significantly move the needle for the Spurs to make a run, or do you think they need another piece to truly make themselves a threat?
I think it definitely upgrades them because of De'Aaron Fox's age. I think that what gets overlooked in all this is, right now, before the trade, Wembanyama is basically his running partner with CP3. And we all know Chris Paul is closer to the end of his career than the beginning. Whereas De'Aaron Fox is either in his prime or entering his prime. So I think that is the biggest part of this. And that is you're acquiring a guy who literally falls in line with basically your team ascending as your best player Wembanyama gets older. My biggest question with this trade is okay, now you got Fox. Now you got him paired with Wembanyama. How long will it take these guys to learn how to play together? Because remember, it took some time for Fox and Sabonis to get used to each other. So now, are we talking about like a few months, a year and a half? LeBron and D Wade and Bosh, they took, what was it, like 3-4 months before they really fell in line with each other. So I'm always curious with these trades about, not that it won't work, but how long does it take for it to be put together? Because we know they're both very good basketball players. It's just a matter of how long does it take? And you also got to wonder, the whole Greg Popovich thing, right? The guy, unfortunately, he had, the stroke a few months ago. Is Popovich watching all these moves, and is he going to eventually say, I'm going to walk away from this stuff because I don't want to interfere? And if he does step back in and start getting involved in more coaching again, how does that impact the Wembanyama Fox relationship? I think there's a few variables down there in San Antonio.
Yeah, some good points there. I didn't even really think about the Popovich factor. You kind of forget that he's still the head coach, even though Mitch Johnson has been the interim since Pop's stroke. You also brought up the Miami Beatles, I guess you want to call them that. So they took a while to get situated. But now Wemby and Fox. Fox is one of the fastest players in the league. He's definitely a crafty guard. Definitely in Sacramento with a guy like Sabonis. Sabonis is not a guy you're expecting to throw down windmill dunks or take step back threes or anything. He's a more in the paint guy. So him and Wemby should be a good combination. And they really didn't give up much for him. They still have guys like Devin Vassell. They still have Stephon Castle. They really didn't give up much, and San Antonio's future looks brighter than it did the last few days. So coming up next, oh boy, the Jimmy Butler saga finally ended on Wednesday. He was traded to the Warriors and signed a 2-year extension, despite the fact that he told Golden State earlier that he wouldn't. I just saw a report that said it's not like officially official yet, but it's getting there. Do you think Jimmy changed his mind recently? Do you think this was just strategy? And how much time do you think a Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, and Draymond Green trio have to contend?
Well, we'll get to the Jimmy Butler, Draymond, Steph thing at the end here. I want to get to the beginning question apart. Jimmy, I don't know if Jimmy actually ever said he wouldn't go to Miami because if we have learned anything over the last several days, it's that there was a lot of misreporting and misinformation out there about Kevin Durant and Jimmy Butler and a couple other players who could or couldn't be traded around the league. And, there was that one report that said that the Pelicans were never going to trade Brandon Ingram. Well, lo and behold, they traded him, right? I'm starting to wonder if we are entering an age. And I was talking with somebody who I know who works in the league, and I don't want to say his name because I want to, protect my source, but a guy I know who works in the league, we were having this conversation early this morning, and he brought up the point to me. And after I asked him this question, I said, "Are we entering an era where teams are purposely putting out misinformation as a bargaining or a strategy tool?" And he pretty much said to me, he's like, "I will not confirm or deny it." And Basically, that's a way of saying yes, right? I'm starting to wonder if some of the Jimmy Butler, Kevin Durant, the Suns, the Warriors, if all of this was strategy. Like, for example, the one report that was corroborated by multiple sources was that the Miami Heat were not happy with the initial set of offerings for Jimmy. And, maybe it was the Warriors putting out misinformation to be like, well, Jimmy doesn't want to be here anyway. And that's why we offered you so little. Or it was a situation where they said, we're going to put out misinformation that we want Kevin Durant. And then Kevin Durant puts out information reacting to that. And now that creates a whole domino effect of now you're putting Miami in a weird position where they can't control the narrative anymore. You look at the Suns, right? The whole Bradley Beal, he won't move his trade clause. Well, do we know he was even ever asked to waive his trade clause? I don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows, right? I think some of this stuff might have been some chicanery, some strategy, some chess movement, people moving the bishop instead of the pawns. If you're familiar with the chess game, kind of stuff. So I think that's what a lot of it was. I think Jimmy, at the end of the day, he just wanted to get paid. I always go back to, Sixer fans may remember the famous or infamous, depending on who you ask, interview Jimmy Butler did on Chris Haynes' podcast when he first became a Sixer. That whole podcast where he's like drinking wine and they're talking. And as the podcast went on, you could tell Jimmy was getting a little buzzed, right? And Jimmy made the comment at one point that he's like, I don't play basketball for free. He's like, if I'm going to keep playing past 35, he basically said, he's like, I'm going to do it because I'm getting paid a certain amount of money. I think Jimmy's goal all along was to maximize his career at the end of his life because he's all invested in this coffee business now, right? He's got this whole thing where, I make coffee and my coffee is the best coffee. And he's like a coffee aficionado, right? So, like, I think Jimmy is trying to build up a war chest financially so that if the coffee business fails, he has something to fall back on. And then when it comes to the whole, will Jimmy work with Steph and Draymond? Of course he will, because at the end of the day, playoff Jimmy's as good as anybody in the league, right? So if playoff Jimmy shows up in Golden State, what's Golden State going to complain about? I think Draymond Green gets a bad rap at times because I think the whole Jordan Poole situation has been proven that Draymond was right. Like, maybe that should be a t-shirt, right? Because Jordan Poole has turned out to be a complete bust since he left Golden State. Maybe Draymond was right all along. Maybe him getting in a fight with him or him getting mad at KD, right? The whole thing with KD was, if you don't want to be here, don't be here. We won without you. Well, guess what? KD left soon after that. So I'm starting to think maybe some of this stuff about Draymond just is not a classic athlete. He speaks his mind. Other guys who are beta males are just uncomfortable with it. And I think Jimmy and Draymond and Steph should get along because I think they all have the same goal.
Yeah, some good points you brought up there. And I'll go back to the first point. That's honestly pretty crazy if this is just all strategy with the false reporting. And like you said, your source neither confirmed or denied it. Just a lot of strategy, and it's one against everybody else. Like, nobody's playing favorites, nobody's teaming up with anybody. It's just, how do I make my team better at the end of the day? You definitely brought up a good point there. And then the Steph, Jimmy, and Draymond trio, I think it could work, honestly. It's kind of an old trio. If this was like 5 years ago, everyone would be like, yup, this is the favorite. But this trio, they are getting a little older. They're all signed, I believe, through the 26-27 season. So I don't know what's going to happen past that, if somebody gets traded or if somebody retires or whatnot. But Jimmy, in the playoffs, there's a switch, and God knows where that switch is in the regular season. But in the playoffs, Jimmy is a different man. And like you said with Draymond, maybe he did have some good points. They didn't need Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant ruined the league for a few years. And Jordan Poole, Washington, what are they doing? Nothing.
By the way, can I
Draymond's,
just say really quick?
yeah.
You saying what is Washington doing is probably one of the best things said in this entire conversation. Because does anybody know why they made that trade of Kuzma from Middleton? I certainly have no idea.
Yeah, no, that was a weird trade. I feel bad for Khris Middleton. That man just got done with double ankle surgery, comes back. He's a champion with the Bucks, and they're like, "Guess what, buddy? You're going to the Wizards." So,
Right.
my condolences to Khris Middleton. So, with Draymond Green though, The one thing though, yes, the Poole and the Durant situation, maybe he was right in a way, but the temper is what kills them. I mean, Steve Kerr even admitted, I don't know, like a year or two ago, he was like the season kind of just went downhill and it started with that Jordan Poole situation. Draymond's temper has definitely gotten them in some sticky situations, but I think a
And really,
trio.
and I'll just say, you're not wrong about that because there's a whole incident where he hit LeBron in the groin right in the NBA Finals, and Draymond's had all these weird incidents on the court. I'm not denying that he's got some issues, right? Like I'm not denying that there's something off with him at times, but I do think that it's the idea that I had a conversation with former Eagles first round draft pick Marcus Smith earlier today, the day that we're having this recording of this podcast. And we were talking about how, athletes are kind of entering an era where they're actually allowed to have, conversations about, mental health and stuff. Right. And I don't know what the state of Draymond Green's mental health is. I don't know if he's somebody who grew up in a household where like, maybe the way you handle your problems was aggression, right? Or maybe he grew up in an environment where you were told not to express yourself, and now that he's older, he's like acting out. Like I don't know his personal life, so there may be a strong possibility that Draymond might be one of those like very frustrated geniuses, but he is very horrible at expressing himself, and maybe him having his own podcast is like therapy for him, giving him an opportunity to talk things out that maybe other people don't want to listen to him talk about. I'm not trying to go heavily on this, but like I wonder sometimes with athletes, like we tend to compare them to other athletes instead of treating them like individuals. Like, who would have thought, and I'm going back in the Wayback Machine, I don't know if you remember Royce White, the guy at Iowa State, great basketball player, gets drafted in the NBA. He's deathly afraid of flying. It pretty much was the beginning of the end of his NBA career. And we were all like, oh, there goes Royce White. Well, guess what? A decade later, he runs for Senate in Minnesota. Like, what on earth was that? Like, no one could foresee, that coming. So it just goes to show you that, we have these ideas in our mind of how athletes should or shouldn't be. And instead of maybe just sometimes evaluating them as individuals instead of trying to lump them all into a monolith.
Yeah, some good points there. I feel like with athletes, fans see them as, well, you make a gajillion more dollars than I do. I have a 9 to 5 and, you play a game. So therefore I can judge you however I want. We don't really take that human aspect into perspective. But going back to the original question, I think that the Steph, Jimmy, Draymond trio, I think it can work out. Just the core around them is going to be a crucial thing to fix as we get to the latter part of the NBA season. So, to wrap up, in your opinion, who are the biggest winners or losers of this trade deadline? It could be the teams, it could be players, it could be the fans in case of Mavericks fans, but who are your biggest winners and losers of the deadline?
I'll give you three here. I think the one big winner is De'Aaron Fox because he got out of Sacramento. I until I see otherwise, I think Sacramento is like purgatory. Like I don't understand what the organization's doing. I don't understand their roster building. They've had so much turnover when it comes to the front office and the coaching staff. So I say good for De'Aaron Fox. Get out of Sacramento and live your life, right? So he's my first winner. My second winner would be, you know what? Let's go with anybody traded out of Chicago because I don't think Chicago knows what they're doing either. So like Zach Levine, even though Levine went to Sacramento, and I think Sacramento is like, is Sacramento is purgatory. Maybe Chicago right now is hell, right? Like I don't think Chicago has any plan. Like at least Sacramento is trying to still have a basketball team. And then the third winner to me is fans of the Miami Heat because I talked with a couple of people who are down in the Miami area. I had Jonathan Zaslow, who's covered the Miami Heat for years on my radio show on 97.3 ESPN, and he said there is an incredible amount of fatigue with Jimmy Butler and that whole situation down there. And I think it was just best for everybody to get that thing over with. Like, it's one thing to say you're going to have a divorce. It's another thing until the divorce papers are basically signed. Right. So, I think that for the Miami Heat, I think that for their fans, I think it's a sigh of relief that the situation is over. And by the way, you got a good return, right? I mean, Wiggins is under contract for a couple of years. Kyle Anderson is under contract for a couple of years. And then they used Dennis Schroeder's expiring contract and shipped him off. What was it, Utah, right? So, it's the idea that, they were able to parlay one guy into multiple moves. And I say that's good for Miami Heat fans.
Yeah, some good points there. I liked your point about the Bulls too. Basically, the Kings right now are the Sacramento Bulls because they have DeMar and Levine on the same team again. So that
Right.
that that should be an interesting combo over there with Sabonis. And you mentioned Dennis Schroeder a few moments ago. He is now on the Utah Jazz. He's been bouncing around the league for the last 24 hours. So I think the Jazz is his final stop on the where am I going today timeline. Some good points there. You said about the Kings with De'Aaron Fox getting out of there. You said about Heat fans. I don't know what with the Jimmy situation. I'm glad they got something for him. I saw there was a video on Twitter yesterday and it was hilarious. It was the Sixers and Heat game and there was a fan behind the Heat bench who broke the news to who was it?
Yes.
Kevin Love, Tyler Hero, and Jaime Jaquez, and
Yeah.
especially Jaime Jaquez had that face. He was like, "What?" So it's interesting when fans find out before the players. So good points there. Definitely a crazy time. Josh, thank you so much for being on the podcast. You had some good points today, and we'll see if we can get you back on in the future.
Sounds like a plan. I appreciate you having me on, and folks can check me out on 97.3 ESPN Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And then people can check me out on Twitter X at Josh Hennig and on Instagram at Joshua S. Hennig.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. If you haven't already, make sure to follow me on social media. I have 2 X or Twitter accounts and 2 Instagram accounts. The podcast accounts are under @Diehlman_NBA for both X and Instagram. My personal X account is @LarryDiehlman18 and my personal Instagram is @Mr_Sports18. They're also in the description on Buzzsprout, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And thank you to Josh Hennig for being our guest this week on the podcast. Remember, you can follow him on X at Josh Hennig, that is JoshHennig, and Instagram at Joshua S. Hennig, JoShuaShennig. And don't forget to spread the word about Diehlman at halftime. Remember, since today was a special edition for our trade deadline, next week will be our other special edition in the month of February. We will cover the All-Star Weekend. See you next time, fellow Hoops fans.